perspective. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this question. Has to do with our man crush from last week, Carmelo Anthony. We pretty much signed him up for a contract here with the Blazers. We thought he was coming, and we thought he was going to be the greatest addition to the team, and that didn't happen. And now we're sad and upset that he's not going to be here. I'm totally exaggerating, but you know I
was about to argue with you. I'm like, I don't know about that.
No, but in all seriousness, you know, it's another free agent that isn't coming, and even he wasn't a free agent, but it was played up like a free agency. He's not coming to Rip City. Your guys' take, I'll start with you, Nate, on Carmelo Anthony dissing the Pacific Northwest and heading to OKC.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing Blazers fans, this is nothing new to Blazers fans. This is familiar territory. It wasn't a free agent, so the ball wasn't totally in his court, but it was because of that no trade clause.
It's a unique scenario.
And because of how active the Blazers were this offseason. I mean, the Blazers should feel slighted, players on that team. They are active in recruiting Carmelo. CJ went out to New York to try to play with him. Damian was active in trying to get in there. And
Dame said he went all in.
Yeah. And they wanted Carmelo on this roster because they thought he could make them good enough to challenge Golden State. And he still, even though we know he almost got traded to Houston, he almost got traded to Cleveland, he still decided Oklahoma City with Paul George and Russell Westbrook is a better spot for me than this current roster. I don't know if the Pacific Northwest had as much to do with it. Obviously, it wasn't appealing to him. If it was, he would have signed on the dotted line and he'd be a Blazer right now. But Oklahoma City, I don't think is very appealing to him either. So I think this had a little bit more to do with the roster and the situation. I think he, for whatever reason, didn't believe he could be the piece that gets the Blazers over the hump. And he obviously feels in Oklahoma City with Russell Westbrook and Paul George.
That's hard to argue with, right? I mean, it's Russell Westbrook and Paul George.
It is, and they also have Steven Adams. But, I mean, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, and Steven Adams, compared to Damian Lillard, C.J. McCollum, Carmelo Anthony, and Yusuf Nurkic, that's pretty close.
So who are you taking?
I mean, I would probably take Oklahoma City, but you also have, in terms of Oklahoma City, you have Russell Westbrook who likes to handle the basketball.
Sure.
And in Portland, I think Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum would be a little more willing to be unselfish to help the team win. And, I mean, we'll see how that works with Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. But I think Blazers fans, I don't know if fans shouldn't feel slighted. Obviously, the Pacific Northwest just wasn't appealing to them. But I think the team and the players who invested time to try to convince him to come to Portland for 2 months should feel slighted and should have an edge going into those Oklahoma City matchups this year.
I agree with that. I think that they'll, let it go. I mean, they can't get hung up on something like that. But yeah, when the Thunder come to town, I mean, Damian Lillard, C.J. McCollum, they were the ones who did most of the recruiting of Carmelo Anthony. They're going to remember that. Yeah. And I understand. I mean, for a lot of Blazers fans, it's tough. It just seems like yet another star rejected Portland, yet another star rejected the Blazers, and you have to move past that. Like, the Blazers still have star players on their roster who are excited to be here, who want to be here long term, and Lillard and McCollum, they might not be as good as Russell Westbrook and Paul George, but they're still two of the better players in the NBA. And Yusuf Nurkic, the sky's the limit with him. So the Blazers still have options. They still have a good big three to build around. And we missed out on Carmelo Anthony, but for Portland, but maybe that's good for the Blazers. Maybe he wouldn't have been a good fit for this roster, and maybe it would have cost them a player like Maurice Harkless, who still has potential and could get better. And so you just have to move on the best you can.
Nah, man, I hope when they come through the Moda Center that they're booing the crap out of Carmelo Anthony, worse than when LaMarcus Aldridge made his return. No, I'm kidding.
That's a lot of booing.
I'm kidding. But, I mean, I think that's one of the good things about this fan base that I've noticed is that people are realistic. They understand what the Blazers are up against. So, people aren't going nuts over this. I think that they would have loved to have him. They would love to have another star player on the roster and somebody that could make them maybe a 3 or a 4 seed rather than competing with some of the lower end playoff seeds in the West. So it is a bummer, though, when you think about that.
It would have been exciting. No one could have debated that.
Right.
If Carmelo would have been here, this would have been one of the most anticipated Blazer seasons in a long time when you have a healthy Yusuf Nurkic and Carmelo Anthony added with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. But as Jared said, maybe this is going to end up being a blessing in disguise for the Blazers. Maybe this roster with a full season together and a little bit of a chip on their shoulder after what happened last year will have time to gel together, and maybe they'll bloom into something we didn't really expect like they did 2 years ago. And with Carmelo Anthony in the mix, you know, he probably would have only been around just the one season and then probably left town, and that would have stalled that type of growth that the Blazers could have this year. So we'll see what they end up with the roster they have, but I think when Oklahoma City comes to town, I think Jared's right. Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum will definitely remember.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these guys are always looking for an edge, and they're players that always seem to have that quote-unquote chip on their shoulder, and they're always looking for a reason to have a little extra motivation. I think that's all you need. And then they're expected to be a contender. This is a team that probably matches up well with the Blazers anyway. So, I mean, those games that they do play could be critical in the standings. You just never know.
Yeah, and it's not over. Neil O'Shea during Media Day said that. He said it's not over. We still have the largest trade exception in the NBA, and we're going to be aggressive. And with a $12.9 million trade exception, you can get some good players. If there's a team that has a player who makes up to that amount of money and needs to shed salary or is looking to deal them for a draft pick or something, there are some good players, absolutely some good players that they could go get during the season.
I think it's just a buzzkill, though, because now we're talking about smaller pieces. We're talking about a nice fit. We're talking about chemistry rather than just the headline. I wanted to see a star.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the star name is sexy.
Yeah.
Like Yusuf Nurkic last year. How many people in Portland
Right, some
knew
people
the
were
name?
mad about Mason Plumlee.
Right, yeah. How many people knew the name Yusuf Nurkic a year ago here in Portland?
Oh, yeah.
And look how he's completely transformed the outlook of this upcoming season from the Blazers.
And the people that did know about him, look what he did in Denver. It wasn't like this was a home run.
And so when Jared says the Blazers have that $12.9 million trade exception, they could end up with another Yusuf Nurkic type impact guy on the roster, guy that, you know, maybe the name isn't sexy and isn't going to draw a lot of attention, but it's a guy who's going to have a huge impact on the team moving forward and can really help them compete in a tough Western Conference.
I believe that the Blazers are aware of their situation and the way that other people view their perception of Portland. Neil O'Shea even, you know, went into detail about that and what they're up against, whether it's the salary cap or whether it's just getting people used to the Pacific Northwest, because this isn't a destination. This isn't a place that a lot of players go to on the off season where they would, like Houston, New York, LA, and so on and so forth. So I think all of that plays into it as well. And maybe if this team becomes a more successful team in the postseason, it becomes more attractive to others. But CJ McCollum, adding to Media Day, he said, well, you also have to know what you're up against when you're recruiting these type of players, because everybody else has different interests. You, me, Jared, we all have different interests. And it could be a money thing. It could be a winning thing. It could be a geographic thing. And so all of these things go into it. So I do like that they're not necessarily giving up on this. And if another name pops up and wants to come here, I think they're going to go all out for him too.
Yeah, and I mean, the Blazers do have star players here.
They do.
They had to draft them,
Right.
granted, but they also signed those guys long term. They didn't have them on their rookie contract, and then they bolted town the second they could. Damian Lillard likes to be in Portland. He loves this city, and he's here at least through 2021. Same with CJ McCollum. He's here. Yusuf Nurkic, all signs indicate he wants to be here in Portland. So that's something Blazers fans should be proud of, and the organization should also be proud of, as they treat these guys well. They fall in love with the city once they're here, and not every organization has that.
Well, now we've got to burn our Carmelo custom Blazers jersey that we all went in on to buy. We were ready to wear that thing.
I think you put the down payment down on that one. So.
Looks like we might have a question.
Yeah, to go along with what you guys are saying, we just had Jason Hawley comment. He thinks Carmelo would have messed with the team chemistry too much. We've had a couple other commenters actually happy that Carmelo's not coming here. So, you guys said, chemistry's not sexy, but it could help teams win games.
That's a good point. When this went down, you had a lot of people that said, who cares? We don't care about this guy. But a lot of the key words in there were chemistry when we looked at the comments when this news broke that, hey, he was heading to OKC. That's a very good point that, chemistry is great. And I remember asking Terry Stotts, too, during Media Day, if that matters, if, chemistry is great going into the next season. You're keeping a lot of your core, the nucleus, intact for the next year. And he said, well, it just depends on the year. That doesn't necessarily mean that because your chemistry was good at the end of last year, that all of a sudden your chemistry will stay the same and it'll be just as good as it was to start the season. So if you want to look at the glass half full, yeah, it's great to have the chemistry, but on the other hand, if you can get better, go get better.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what he's referring to is last year.
Yeah.
I mean, they brought back a lot of the same guys.
That's
and
exactly
there
what
were
he's
high
referring to.
expectations
Yeah.
for the team going into last year. And it just, for whatever reason, did not mesh together the way it did the season before when they got to the second round of the playoffs. But it is, you know, it's a new season. These guys are familiar with each other. And I think this year they do have more of a chip on their shoulder because they were only 500 last year. Some of those guys, you know, were getting new contracts in the first year of their new deal. And, you know, I think some of the motivation may have lapsed a little bit. And I think some of that is back this upcoming season. I think that's going to help them.
And I think, you know, a little dose of realism isn't a bad thing either.
Yeah.
Because Carmelo Anthony didn't choose Portland, and we don't know the reason he didn't. But the Blazers won 41 games last year and 44 the year before that. They've been the 8th seed. You know, they were the 5th seed the year before that. But they're not the Rockets, they're not the Thunder, they're not the Warriors. They're not these teams that free agents are going to want to go to because of the record of success that they've had. And I think that with players like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum who want to go out and recruit players, and with a general manager like Neil O'Shea who's going to look for good pieces that will complement the roster, if the Blazers can improve and start to become, you know, a team that's not languishing near the bottom of the playoff standings, then they're going to have more success in attracting those kind of players. It may just be that Carmelo Anthony looked at the Thunder, who won, I don't remember, 46 games, I think, last season, and then added Paul George and thought, you know what, that's a better chance for me to challenge the Warriors. Because that's what every player is looking at, is you want to be on a roster that, you know, no one's going to challenge the Warriors most likely, but which rosters have the best chance to maybe make it happen. And the Blazers won 41 games last year, and that's hard to argue with.
Yeah, I think what the Blazers were kind of banking on was the success they had with Nurkic.
Right.
You know, I'm sure in recruiting, I'm sure they said, look, we won 41 games last year, but that's not who we are now. We have this game changer on this roster for us. We went 14-6 with him. We won 60% of our games. That's the team we're going to be going into this year. And then you, Carmelo, are going to help boost us above that. You know, I'm not sure. Like you said, we have no idea what went into his train of thought in terms of where he wanted to go. But it's obvious the Pacific Northwest wasn't all that appealing. Because if it was appealing and if Portland was really appealing to him, he would be here right now.
Yeah, I think